John chapter 15. And it says this: I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given you. This is my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Amen. You know, when you get a date that you're supposed to be speaking on, I don't know how it is with you, but I sort of think, Lord, what on earth do I talk about? What on earth do I preach on? And that was the situation that I was in recently, and then God reminded me of something. That on the 4th of July, 50 years ago, I came to Christ. "50 years is a milestone. Sorry. Now, it's a milestone in anybody's experience, 50 years. And I felt that God wanted me to share my testimony rather than preach. And so, I didn't grow up in a Christian family. My mum and dad were not parents. I was an only child. They weren't Christians. And I think my dad was an actual non-believer in the sense that he did not believe. My mother came to Christ in her 70s, many, many years down the line. So I grew up in a family which did not know the Lord. And I never ever went to a church, never ever had any Christian contact as far as I can recall. The only thing that I did have, which was not good, was the fact that when I was a teenager, I had two friends. The three guys that we were known as the Three Musketeers, because we was always in the pub. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, we would be in the pub. But one of the guys, his parents were spiritualist mediums, and they belonged to a spiritualist organization, which I knew nothing about. And one night, one of the guys and myself, we messed around with a Ouija board. I didn't know it, but we were delving into darkness. It was spiritual darkness. I didn't know that at the time. It was just a thing that we were doing. But what I came to realize in later times was that that was when some things started to go wrong in my life. It wasn't an overnight thing. It was a gradual thing. Measure by measure, bit by bit, things started to go wrong. What I didn't know was that God was looking. God was looking on. One day, his parents said there's a great big meeting in a spiritualist church. in the East End of London. So the three of us decided to go to it. We get on the train and we go down the road, and eventually we get to where this building is that this big meeting's going on. And we got there a little bit late, maybe 5 or 10 minutes late. And we walked up to the front doors and we tried the door, and it wouldn't open, it was locked. Or assumed it was locked. So we thought, well, how on earth are we going to get in there? The meeting thing, whatever it was going on. You could hear it inside. So we walked round the building to see if there was a back door, and there wasn't. But what we could see was where the windows were with the opaque glass. So we banged on the glass windows because we could see the people were in there. Didn't get anywhere with that, so we went back and we banged and banged and banged on the front door. Nothing. So in the end we thought, oh, this is a like Game of Soldiers thing, this is. Nah, come on, we've had enough, let's go down to the pub. So that's what we did. Got back on the train, went to the pub. After I got saved, God reminded me of that event. And he said, the reason why you didn't get into that building was because I didn't allow it. He stopped us from going into that meeting. It was full of darkness. Because if I had got in there, I would have been sucked into that spiritual darkness, which would have totally destroyed me. So, time went by, teenage years went by. When I got into my mid-20s, I started to become ill. Started off in a small way, finished up in a major way. I became mentally ill because I had brain damage. Something in my brain had gone wrong. And I got to the point where it was affecting my physical body. And I was living in my mother's home. My dad had died some years before. And I left home. And for a period of time, wasn't for very long, I lived on the streets. You know, you sometimes see people huddled in shop doorways and that sort of thing. Well, that was me for a short space of time. And I would spend some nights huddled in a doorway. If it was raining, I got in a phone box because it was drier. And sometimes, you know, back in the day, you had all-night laundrettes. Remember them? And you could spend, because they were dry and they had seats in there and they had a little sink. And I sometimes used to spend my nights in a all-night laundrette unless the police whipped you out and sent you on your way. Eventually, the illness got so bad, I returned to my mum's home. And the brain damage resulted in me not being able to sleep. Now, if you talk to Mal, she'll tell you that I have no problem sleeping. You know, you can peg me up on a washing line and I'll sleep. But then I couldn't. Because in my mind, in my brain, it was like a light continually burning. And the physical effects were beginning to take place. My eyesight began to deteriorate in this eye. I had a stomach full of ulcers. And I couldn't walk straight. Whenever I walked, it was like a man being drunk. You know when you see a drunk walking along, they don't walk in a straight line, do they? They kind of veer from one side to the other. And that is the way that I used to walk. And the reason I used to walk was because the tension within me was so fierce that the only way I could get any relief from it was to walk. And I would go out in the morning, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'd come back at 6, 7, or 8 at night, and I would be walking the entire time. I went all over the place. Sometimes got picked up by the police because I didn't look too good. And then they put me down again because they didn't want to know. I was not in a good place. And during that period of time, God tried to get my attention. And I didn't realize it then. It was only later that I really saw it clearly. I went through a town centre once in Barking. It's a place in the East End of London. And there was an Elim church. It was Easter time, and they had erected 3 giant crosses in the middle of the town. Massive, great things. And there was a big crowd there, and I guess they were doing an open air around the Easter period. And I stood there looking at these 3 crosses, but it didn't register. But God was trying to talk to me. I wandered on and staggered on. And I don't know, sometime later, whenever it was, there was a young people's group from a Pentecostal church that was doing an outreach thing. And, they had guitars and singers and all that kind of thing. And I walked past them. And there was a guy on the end, he had like a placard he was holding up. And it said, "Jesus is alive today." And I looked at it, and it didn't register. I staggered on, and staggering was the description. I was lurching from side to side. I was dressed in the same clothes that I'd worn for weeks and weeks on end. I had 1 pair of shoes, and they all had holes in them. So I used to put sheets of cardboard in it to stop the rain getting in, which didn't work very well. Sometimes people talk about angels, and I had a little experience which has often caused me to wonder. There was I one day, lurching from side to side down the road, and coming towards me was a fellow that looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, wearing the same clothes. It was like looking in a mirror. And this guy lurched his way towards me and past me, and you could get just about a fag paper between us. And I looked round, gone. No one there. And I came to realize much later on, after I got saved, that God was trying to talk to me. But it wasn't getting through. Until one day, I went out on one of my long walks in 1976, sometime in June, I think it was. And I turned into this street, and it was empty. There's no one there. No one was about. Mid-afternoon. And as I walked down this street, God spoke to me. Different from the placards, different from the images. God spoke to me. And it wasn't a voice that you could hear with your ears. It was a voice that spoke into me. And what God said was very, very simple. He said, I made you, and there should be a communion between us, and there isn't. And that was it. And I wandered on for maybe 20, 30 yards, and suddenly, what dawned on me was not what's what was said so much, but who had said it. I realized that God was talking to me. And the fear of God hit me like a ton of bricks. We often say, do we not, that God meets people where they are. And that was my experience on that Saturday afternoon. The fear of God hit me so much that I ended up running home. I don't know where my mother was on that day. She didn't turn up till much later in the evening. And I got home and I got indoors and I ended up kneeling in the middle of the living room floor. And I was asking God to be merciful. I just begged him for mercy. Nobody had ever told me to do it. I'd never heard about it. It just came. That is what I had to do. I begged for mercy and I prayed on and I prayed on and I prayed on. And in the middle of it, God said one word, Jesus. Said it once, Jesus. And I prayed on, and it was as if no one was there, like an emptiness. I remember getting up off the floor and literally crawling up the stairs. I had a bedroom in the back of the house. And I collapsed on the bed, literally collapsed. And in that moment, God began to deal with me. It's the first time I've ever known what we call a vision, or what I call a vision. As I lay there on that bed, God showed me something, and it was like looking at if you're old enough in years, you know what I mean when I say cinemascope. It was like a cinemascope screen in Technicolor. The only thing is, I wasn't looking at it, I was in it. And what God showed me was something from the scriptures, but I didn't know it because I'd never read it, never seen it. Didn't know anything about it. What he showed me was a vine growing up, a big, tall plant growing. And all over this plant were these branches growing out of it. And there was fruit on the branches, and there were green leaves. It was a great Technicolor picture. And as I lay there looking at it, one of the branches got separated from the center of the vine. And the further it traveled away from the vine, the more the leaves dried up and fell off. The fruit shriveled up and fell off. And what started out as a green branch became a dry, pale-looking stick. And I looked at this stick, and it snapped. And where it snapped, it sparked. And there was a flame. And the flame engulfed the entire picture. And God said to me, that's you. That's your life. That's the end of it. Except you abide in the vine. And I didn't know what that meant. Had no idea, because I'd never seen it, never read it, nothing. As I lay there, I've got to be honest with you, I swore and cursed and did everything. And God healed me. It was a strange experience. Somebody said to me, when God healed you of the brain damage and the problems in your body, what on earth did it feel like? And the only way I could describe it to them was like somebody switching on laser beams. Doop, 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 doop. God touched my head, my body all over, and he healed me. He dealt with that brain damage, and he did a lot of repair work in my body as I lay there on that bed. I guess what I'd done, and I hadn't realized it, was that something in me abandoned myself to God. Come what may, no matter what the outcome, something in me abandoned itself to God. And then he put me to sleep. I hadn't slept for months. And he put me to sleep. Before he did, he showed me something, which I didn't understand at the time, and it took me a long while to cotton on to what it was. We're running out of time. What he showed me was like looking through a camera lens, looking through a lens of a camera into a picture. And gradually the camera lifted up. So as it did, the picture below it got bigger. And I suddenly realized that what I was looking at was the roof of a house. And it went back a little bit further, and it was definitely a house. And suddenly, it caught fire. And it burned a light. And the picture went up a bit more, and there was another light in another street, and it was boom, the light came on. And in another street, the light came on. And as I looked at it, I realized I was looking at a map of where I actually lived. And the first house that had that light was where I lived. And all the other streets were around. And I watched this map, and the lights came on here and here and here and here. And eventually, it became like a white line of light that went here, there, and everywhere, and over, just disappeared off the horizon. And then God put me to sleep. I woke up in the morning, surprised to recognize the wallpaper, because I didn't think I would be there, to be honest. So there I am, being the object of Jesus' miracles. And I got up, went downstairs. My mum had obviously arrived in the house sometime the night before. And she went and got a neighbour. And you talk about God providing things. The neighbour was somebody who attended a Salvation Army church. And they lived just round the corner. I knew them well. And she said, "Why don't you come with me to my church this morning?" So me, I'm still a bit spaced out by what has happened. I'm still covered. I'm still wearing the dirty clothing and everything I've been wearing for goodness knows how long. And I agreed to go to this Salvation Army church, the very first time I'd been in any church in my life, because I was completely ignorant of the gospel. Totally ignorant. So we get to this Salvation Army church, local one, and I'm sitting there on this pew, and there's 20 or 30 people there, something like that. And I'm sitting there wondering, what on earth is going on here? And there was this fellow who was on the platform with one of those Salvation Army uniforms on, you know. He was a visiting speaker. And he was talking about Enoch, who was and was not, because God took him. That didn't help very much. And as he was preaching and talking away, he suddenly stopped And he walked to the edge of the platform and he said, you know, God will even save a man who's got holes in his shoes. And I'm sitting there with holes in my shoes and bits of cardboard in them. Luxury. I never went back to that church. They were good to me when I was there. No two ways about that. And God spoke to me. And when I got home, I found on my bookshelf a little Bible, the Gideon's Bible. I picked it up as a kid. Never ever read it. But the thing that kept resounding in me was Jesus. Jesus. And I thought, sure ignorant I was, where do you find Jesus? I'd been in a church. Where do you find Jesus? I spent the next week or so asking people, do you know where I can find Jesus? And most people looked at me and thought, what's this weirdo doing? And I remember one day I went up to a guy who was working in a park, working pots and plants and things. And I've got this little Gideon's Bible in my hand. And I went up to this guy and I said, you don't know where I can find Jesus, mate, do you? And he looked at me and he looked at the little Bible that was in my hand. And he took it out of my hand and he turned it to one of the Gospels. I can't remember which one. And he handed it back to me. He said, start there. Shows you how ignorant I was. I didn't know that the answer to the question, where do you find Jesus, was in my hand. I didn't know. During that week, I was asking lots of people, do you know where you can find Jesus? No, mate, most people said. Haven't got a clue. Try a church, some people said. One day, I walked into a job centre. There were two things that kept hammering away at me, and I don't know why. I do now, but I didn't then. One was that I felt dirty. And it wasn't just the old clothes that were stained. It wasn't the fact that I was a grubby-looking person. I felt that I wasn't clean. And I got into a bath, got out of the bath. An hour later, I was back in it again. I was trying to get rid of the dirt. The second thing was, I went into a job centre. I was in no fit state to hold down a job in any way, shape or form, but I walked into a job centre. And the job centres in those days, they used to have little like postcard things on the wall, and you took the card down and went to the desk and so on. So I'm standing there looking at all of these things on the board. And there was a fellow standing next to me. His name is John Ramsden, I discovered later on. And he looked at me and I looked at him and he said, we're both in the same boat here, mate, aren't we, looking at these jobs? Yeah. So he said, here, take this. And he gave me a church tract, a simple little church card. And it had a picture of a Pentecostal church on the front. And inside it was all with the meetings and when they took place and the time. And on the back was a little picture of the minister. And underneath was the address of the manse. That's the place where the minister lives, if you don't already know that. Normally I would throw that away, but as it happens, I stuck it in my pocket. And time went on, and I didn't realize it, but the enemy was having a right old go at me. And then one day I took this leaflet thing out of my pocket, looked at it, saw the address on it, and thought, I'm going to go and knock on the door of wherever this is, because they might be able to tell me where I can find Jesus. Ignorance again. So I go there. I go and knock on the door of a minister's house at 7:15 on a Sunday night. So where was he? He wasn't there. He was on a platform in the church preaching the gospel. So I thought, well, that's a waste of time. I didn't know where he was. I went back the following morning. Now, this particular minister's name was Michael Jarvis. And he normally, Monday afternoons, was his day off, as it were. They had a prayer meeting in the evening, but during the day he was free. And they would normally go out and have lunch somewhere, him and his wife. But on this day, it didn't happen. And I banged on their door. And his wife opened the door and she said, come in. I thought, all right. So when I walked, he was sitting in the living room in an armchair, and they sat me down, and I told them my little story up until that point. And he just sat and listened. And he said, I don't know what's happened to you exactly. He said, but come to the church. Come tonight. So I said, okay. I get to a Pentecostal church that's holding a prayer meeting. And I walked in, and the place filled up with people, and the meeting got underway. And I thought, where on earth am I? But it was in that, to me, strange environment that God started talking to me, and talking to me. And I came eventually to the Lord. The guy who gave me the tract, the guy who gave me the church leaflet, for want of a better description, couldn't read. He couldn't write. John Ramsden was unable to read. He had a Bible, could understand a few words, but couldn't read it. He couldn't write. But the one thing he did do was put that tract in my hand. Link in a chain, a link in a chain. I came to the Lord on the 4th of July, made a public declaration, you know the thing I'm talking about. So on the 4th of July, 1976, 50 years ago, I couldn't hold down a job to save my life. God was working on me and sorting me out. And boy, did the Lord have a job on his hands. One day, the minister of the church came to me and he said, can you paint? I said, I don't know. Never done it. Why? He said, well, round the church, round the car park, they've got these railings, these green railings. Do you think you could rub them down and paint them, repaint them? So I said, okay, I'll give it a go. And that's what I did. So we did the railings. And then the pastor came back to me and he said, how now if you do some painting inside the building? And I thought he meant just a little bit of wall, you know. We finished up painting the entire church, top to bottom and end to end. But it's really what I needed to do. But something happened in the middle of the, something happened in the middle of this painting job. I was there most of the time on my own. Occasionally, there were one or two guys that came in and helped me with it. One of those guys was another man by the name of Joe. So there's two Josephs. Joseph number one, Joseph number two. And the main hall was probably twice the height of this building. And it was a lot bigger, the main hall. We were working on that main hall. And we had this scaffold tower. It's the kind of thing where you have metal bars that you lock together and you put a wooden planking system on it, and then you stand on that, and then you build the tower around you, and eventually you go up and up and up. So there we are, working with this tower in this room. And I'm standing here, the tower's in front of me, and I'm handing the metal bars up to Joe number 2, who's up there. Standing alongside the wall of the building, solid wall. In front of me is the tower. On this side, there's stacks and stacks of chairs like those, because we had to move all the furniture. Behind me, there's a stack of chairs. So in the end, I'm standing in a little box area, handing the stuff up, and he's banging it into place. And suddenly, Joe number 1 or 2 says, "Hey, look out." And I heard this rumbling sound. And one of the metal bars just rolled off the top of the tower and came towards me. And I couldn't go anywhere. I had a wall there, tower there, chairs all the way around me. I could not move anywhere. And this bar came towards me, and it got to within about 18 inches, and then the thing just went, it deflected and hammered into the floor. And I thought, wow, how on earth did that happen? God started speaking to me that night. He said, "I protected you today, and you know it." Boy, did I know it. He said, "I will always protect you. You're a child of mine. I will always protect you. Always will." And I've proven that time after time after time. If you're going about the Lord's business, whatever that might be for you, He will protect you. He will look after you as you go. That's not to say you put yourself in harm's way, but if you end up in harm's way, the Lord will protect you, whoever you are, if you are a child of His. That happened around about 50 years ago. Since then, that church has been taken apart, rebuilt, added to. It's a massive, great building today compared with what it was. But I can take you to the parquet flooring, and there's a great big dent in it. That's where the bar landed. I will always protect you. So time went on, and God was doing a work, and I was benefiting from it. And then one day, God started talking to me, and He said, "I've done an awful lot for you. I've worked miracles in your life." And all I could say was, "Yes, Lord, you have." But then He said to me, "I want to do something greater. I want to do a miracle that's bigger than all of those I've done for you." And I thought, well, what on earth can that be? And God said, I want to work in you in a place that you know nothing about. In the heart of you, in the center of you, in the depths of you. That's where I want to work. On the inside, not on the outside. And God said, all you're going to have to do is let me do it. If you will let me do it, if you will open your heart to me and allow me to really come in. He said there will come a time when you and I will stand on a high place and you will look behind you, and what you will be looking at is the wreckage of the life that you had. And it will be removed and laying down the slopes below. He said, "At that point, you and I will turn round and we will walk on together in newness of life." And all I had to say was yes or no. Simple as that. And I said yes. I didn't know what the outcome would be. I had no idea of what was involved. But God had said it, and I said yes. And He said this to me: "If you don't let me do it, if you don't want me to do it, that's okay. But there is the possibility that you could find yourself back in the position that I first found you in. Because the problem wasn't on the outside, it was on the inside. The person that I had become, totally my own fault, was the person that was coming from the inside out. And God said, I don't need to deal with the stuff that's on the outside. I need to deal with the inside. Will you let me do it?" It's either yes or no. And I said yes. And I don't know how long it took. It was weeks, it was months. It wasn't always an easy journey. But there did come a time when God sort of caused me to look round and realize the life that I did have was gone. And the new life was there. And I can only put it this way. He took my hand. He said, "Come on. We're going to walk in this newness of life." So we did. And I did. I just got a few notes here trying to keep me on track. We all up for a few minutes? So like most people, I got involved in the work of the local church, the home church. And you know, in those days, that involved doing an awful lot of door-to-door work. You didn't have the internet, you didn't have the website and stuff. So it was door-to-door work, it was canvassing, and it was street work. When I was a kid, and as an adult, I had a complete fear of dogs. Dogs terrified me. Whether it was a big one or a little one, made no difference. I was terrified of dogs. So much so that if I saw a dog coming towards me, I would go all the way around the block to avoid the dog. Fear of dogs. One day I'm canvassing out on the streets, and it was a warm day, and I walked up to this house, and the front door was open, and I could hear voices way out the back, probably in the back garden, and I guess they were wanting to let the air through, you know. So I thought, no one's going to answer the door. I'll leave one of my leaflets and visiting bits and pieces on the doormat, and that'll be that. And as I dropped it onto the mat, a door opened, and the biggest Alsatian I've ever seen in my life came bounding down the hallway, and I froze on the spot, literally petrified. And this hound of the Baskervilles came flying at me, and it got to within about an inch, and it could go no further. It was growling, and it was the claws and everything standing on its hind feet, and it was as if somebody had put a plate of glass between us. The dog could not touch me, and it came back to me: I will always protect you. Door opened, guy came out. He said, "Oh, sorry, mate." He said, grabbed hold of this dog and chucked it in the back room, and we had a little chat. I will always protect you. One day I was walking home, a long time afterwards. And I was in a street where I was on this side of the road, and they got the road and then the pavement the other side, and I think there was a council green, and the houses went round the green. And as I'm walking by, this little dog, but I say little dog, this medium-sized dog, came flying out the garden and headed straight for me. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And as I stood there and this dog was coming towards me, happened in a matter of seconds, God said to me, rebuke it. And I thought, what? He said, rebuke it. Use my name. And I'd never heard God say that before. Use my name. I don't know what I said to the dog, but I rebuked it, and I used the name of Jesus, and the dog stopped in its tracks, turned around and ran off. Strangely enough, it cured me of my fear of dogs. Use my name. You know, we often say, Lord, in your name, don't we? But I don't think we really know the power that is in his name. I'll have to finish that. I was going to talk about this, just something that God kind of laid on my heart that I needed to share, but why, I don't know. But we've run out of time. Let me just share one or two things. One night we was in a Bible study, middle of the week, and the meeting had come to an end, and I had to see 2 or 3 people in the congregation. So I'm moving from this person to that person to that person. And do you know when you get the feeling that somebody's following you? You get that kind of sneaky feeling? Eventually, I get to the end of the room, and I'd seen all the people I needed to see, and I turned round, and about 6 feet away from me, there's this woman. And I thought, hello, me luck's in. And I'm looking at this lady, and she's looking at me, and she said, hello. So I said, well, hello. And she said, how are you? I said, I'm fine. How are you? She said, oh, I'm great now. So I'm standing there, we're having this conversation for a couple of minutes. I'm thinking, who on earth are you? And she said, you don't remember me, do you? So I said, no, to be honest, I don't. I've met a lot of people, I don't. Sorry. She said, I live in Alban Road. I thought, oh, okay, I know that road. She said, one day you spoke to me at my garden gate in the summer. This was in the autumn. So I said, oh, yeah, did I? She said, yes, you did. She said, and in the course of our conversation, she said, you said something that stuck in me, and I couldn't get rid of it. What it was, I don't know. She said, but I just couldn't get rid of this thing that you said to me. And I'd gone on. And she said she got so worried about it, she went to a local Baptist church, talked to a minister about it, and he eventually led her to the Lord. And she got saved. And she said, I had to come and find you. She said, I knew you came from this church. She said, but I had to come and find you to tell you about that. And the thing that God pointed out to me then is that you can have conversations with people. You can do stuff serving the Lord, and you may not know what God is doing, but he's doing it. And God had to show me that in order to encourage me to continue in the doing. I was walking home one day down a place called Lodge Avenue, and I was looking at this garden, and it had a hedge that was about 10 feet tall, all overgrown, and the grass was about 3 feet high. It was obviously been neglected for ages. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed this elderly lady standing on the doorstep. And she kind of waved at me, and I waved at her. And I stopped, and I went and had a little chat with her. And I went home, and I talked to somebody in the church who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And they got a gardening team to go there and sort this elderly lady's garden out. And I used to visit her from time to time. Could never get her to the church. I didn't have a car. She was a very big woman, disabled. So couldn't get her to a meeting or anything. So I used to sometimes have a cup of tea with her and chat with her. And one day I knocked on her door. She opened the door, and I looked at her and I thought, there's something different about you. I don't know what it is, but there's something very different about you. So we got down and we sat down and had a chat and had a cup of tea. And I said to her, seems something different about you. What have you been doing? What have you been up to? So she said, I've been praying over the weekend. I said, oh, yeah? I said, yeah. I said, right, okay. So she said, I asked God to give me what you've got. And clearly he did, because you could see the transformation in her. No church, no preaching, no service, nothing like that. God met her where she was. Somebody had to talk to her. Somebody has to talk to somebody. Somebody has to be the link in the chain. That can be you. You're out there on the streets, at work, whatever. You get into conversation with someone. That could be you. If God uses. I'm going to call this quits because it take too long. Maybe another time. Someone want to pray? Okay, I'll do it. Father, we just say thank you for our personal testimonies that glorify you. And we just ask, Lord, that this basic tool that you've put in our hands, you will use to your glory in days to come. In Jesus' name, amen.